At the very least, we should debate. We should debate whether or not we are going to relinquish our rights. We should be in rebellion saying to our government that the Constitution that protects our freedoms must be obeyed. Where's the outrage? The bulk collection of our records, this invasion of privacy, isn't even working. That we aren't capturing terrorists that we wouldn't have caught otherwise by this information.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining us now is John Yoo, law professor, UC Berkeley, and of course he was former Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the United States and the author of Point of Attack, Preventive War, International Law, and Global Welfare. John, as always, I welcome you. Rand Paul, a lot of people, I'm sure including you, think he has it all wrong.
I'm afraid he does on the facts and the law. On the facts, I think it's just crazy to say that this NSA bulk collection program hasn't produced any information that's led us to break up terrorist attacks. And unless he's privy to information that's not privy to the heads of the NSA and the CIA, who have been telling us in public that the information has led to the prevention of terrorist attacks, I think he's completely wrong. And then on the law, I think, which is the most important question here, I think he's incorrect. And I'm afraid the other senators and congressmen voted with him too. The Fourth Amendment does not protect information which is handed over to third parties. Our contents of our conversations are still constitutionally protected and are not intercepted. But the Constitution has long been held by our courts not to give any privacy protections to phone numbers that we dial and things like that. Those are things that are outside our privacy protection. So I actually think our government has been trying to respect very carefully the Constitution and our individual rights throughout all of the responses to 9/11.
And I know you were very cognizant of that, certainly, when you drew up the parameters that you drew up for the Justice Department at the time after the attacks. You also believe that the Federal Appeals Court in New York back in early May, which put the kibosh in effect on the NSA's telephone metadata collection, you believe that they had it wrong as well.
I do, and I think if you're someone who's a big believer in what the Second Circuit did there in New York or Rand Paul, why are things any better now? The government can still get all this information by warrant, but what they've done is they have slowed it down. They have made it much harder for our government to act quickly and decisively after we get information about Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda leaders' phone book or contact information. I don't see why our privacy protections are better enhanced and our national security is kept protected just by making our intelligence agents work at a slower, deliberately more inefficient, ineffective way.
What about the rest of the Patriot Act? I mean, how much of what was in place that you consider to be, well, I guess you considered it all to be of value, how much of that is now gone?
Well, most of the fighting is about the NSA bulk collection program. Most of the other provisions of the Patriot Act should have been renewed for a new period, but they're extremely important. And what bothers me is that Senator Paul and people who are voting with him are willing to hold all that hostage. Things like being able to surveil lone wolves who were not directly connected to a terrorist group, but who are popping up all around the country now, launching sympathizer attacks, or being allowed to follow those kinds of suspects and terrorists no matter when they change communication devices, email addresses, and phone numbers. Now, they were willing to force us to go back to exactly the world we had before 9/11, in a world where we had to willingly blind ourselves and not use the tools that would have allowed us to stop the 9/11 attacks themselves.
Do you? And the public, by the way, believes in the gathering of the information. Let me ask you this one more. Recent poll out, CNN of all people, and this has been the case in a couple of polls now, that President George W. Bush has a higher favorability rating and a lower negative than Barack Obama. Do you see that as any sort of vindication or at least of something positive?
Yes, I actually think that in this one case, some of the opponents of the Patriot Act or NSA in Congress are out of whack with what the American people want. I think the American people are very reasonable, and they have always supported by significant majorities the anti-terrorism provisions that President Bush took, and that President Obama, who campaigned widely against them, kept many of them, like the NSA program, intact. And so I think the American people are reasonable and practical, and they know that these kinds of things are minor, if any, kinds of intrusions on civil liberties and are worth it when compared to the mission to keep the country safe from further terrorist attacks.
30 seconds, how concerned are you, especially in the wake of what we saw in Boston and elsewhere recently? How concerned are you?
Well, what worries me is that the end of the NSA bulk collection permit is taking away exactly the kind of tool we need for the kind of attacks we're going to be getting in the future, which are going to be more dispersed, less like the 9/11 hijackers and more like the Boston Marathon bombings, or that guy in Texas popping up randomly by sympathizers who aren't closely organized with Al-Qaeda.
John, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
James Taranto's next from the Journal. Don't go away.